kind of projects, but sometimes other kind of one-time money kind of projects. This year, we have some carry forward money from last year to deal with, to use, which is a good thing. And we're also likely to have substantial amount of money from the American Rescue Plan, which will be allocated by the council. It may be part of the budget process. It may not be. This has not been enacted yet by Congress, but it will be, we think, in the next couple of days, probably tomorrow. And that will provide us with a real significant opportunity to build back and to make really significant investments, new investments in our community. So it's going to be a very interesting process this year. I think there are lots of opportunities for the community. And of course, it all begins with hearing from you as to what you think is important about funding our metro government. Keisha, I'm not sure exactly who is next.
Okay, Chair Hollander, I think that's me. Thank you very much. So we have some very special guests here with us today as we talk about this budget and how we do the budget. And so I'm going to introduce them one by one, and they're going to take 3 to 5 minutes to talk to you about their department, what their department does, and how the budget affects their department, and the ins and outs of that. And so the first person I'm going to call on to give us an overall discussion about that process or about the budget as a whole is Daniel Frock and Aaron Jackson from the Office of Management and Budget. Daniel?
Thank you, President James. Just as a sound check, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, just confirming. Thank you. I'm Daniel Frock. I'm with the Office of Management and Budget, and depending where you're looking on the grid, I'm joined by my our budget director, Aaron Jackson. We've worked together for the last 15 years. It's been a pleasure putting together the budgets with him and with the council and the mayor. For us, I think Chairman Hollander did a nice job of explaining the public process of the budget once it's introduced by the mayor. His budget address will be April 22nd. Working backwards from there, we generally will start on the administration side with our strategic planning process, which usually takes place in the fall. We have governmental strategic plans, and those strategic plans kind of waterfall into the departments where the departments support the overall strategic plan. So with that in mind, we usually will undertake a mid-year forecast, both on our revenue and our expense side. We meet with departments throughout the year, but in particular, we will circulate a budget questionnaire to departments to assess a variety of needs for them, any sorts of changes to their environment in terms of how they're working, if there's a greater demand for certain services or a smaller demand for certain services, if prices for equipment, contractors, labor, anything that they normally would provide are going up or down. If you think of it as simple as we use fuel for police cars or for snow plows, if those usage patterns are going to change or if the cost is going to change, we would want to incorporate those so that we can continue to estimate the services, the cost of funding need for the services to be provided. And then that's on existing services. And then we always have a request if there's a need for reductions, we will look at a prioritized budget from the department director of what will least affect the strategic plan, be most utilitarian. And then conversely, if there's an opportunity to expand or enhance a budget, what that will look like. I think of it as every director or department should know their kind of level funding at $1, and if you had to take away 2, 3, or 4 cents, what would be the first things you would remove, and vice versa. If you had an additional 2, 3, or 4 cents to add to the budget, what would be the things that you would either restore or add back? So we send that to the departments. We also ask about their capital needs. They respond to us. They take great pains to look at constituent services. If there's an equity impact on those who are served, those are some of the questions that we have. We also ask if there are other ways that they can achieve their goals through policy as opposed to through funding only. Sometimes it can be a combination of those two. Sometimes departments are affected by state and federal government either policies or funding. As Chairman Hollander mentioned, all departments are likely going to be affected by the passage of the American Rescue Plan, assuming that happens in the next couple of days. So those would be the types of things that we would correspond with the department. That's usually in the January to February timeframe, and then once we have that information, we update the council. We meet with the mayor. He puts together a proposal, a recommendation that's provided to the council for the last meeting in April. That usually takes place during this time period now, between say March 1st and mid-April, as Aaron and his team complete the budget. So that's kind of our overall process. In terms of O&B itself and what services we provide, we have a few different directors over different areas. Aaron's over the budget area. We also have Monica Harmon, who will be replacing me as the CFO here shortly. She is our finance director. She has responsibilities over areas such as payroll, treasury, risk management, grants, which has been very large this year because of the CARES Act, our audit process. Those all fall under finance. We also have the Revenue Commission, which is our local tax collection arm. Chairman Hollander is President James's designee to the Revenue Commission. Many of our constituents, that's usually the most public-facing element of OMB. We also have procurement services. That's public-facing in terms of vendors. And then we also have open records, archives and open records under our purview as well. And then, Aaron, I'll stop there and see if you'd like to add anything. And then I know it's just a short introduction, but I appreciate the chance to be here.
Thank you all for the opportunity for inviting us. I don't have much more to add. I think he outlined it to perfection, so I don't have much more to add. So thank you.
Thank you. Could you just add a little bit more and tell everybody what our budget is currently for the year and the difference between the capital budget and the operations budget, and then thank you.
Oh, sure. So the operating budget, the general fund, I'll just speak of the operating budget first. The operating budget is roughly, we have a general fund budget of approximately a little over $600 million, and approximately a little over 50% of that comes from three primary sources. There's occupational taxes, corporate taxes or net profit taxes, and insurance premiums. And those funds, along with other sources such as federal, state, and donations or other agency receipts for the Parks Department or library, those sorts of things, or the zoo. Those also support the agency operating budget. And on the expense side, a little over 50% of the budget funds public safety, and that would be police, fire, EMS, corrections, those agencies. And the operating budget also funds approximately right at about 5,000 full-time employees, and approximately, just without going into too much details on the numbers, but about 75% of those employees are represented by union. And we have about 21 or so unions, collective bargaining agreements. And overall, the operating budget, when you take into account the general fund and federal funds, state funds, other sources, it's just under about $900 million for fiscal year 21. So that just gives you a sense of what's appropriated to fund the various services that Daniel mentioned. Now on the capital side, that's a pretty large budget as well. It's about just under $130 million, and that funds various capital items such as street resurfacing, bridge repair, general maintenance, deferred maintenance rather, general repair, and that too sources. So that just gives you a sense of the operating budget as well as the capital budget.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. And then next, I'll introduce the Director, Vanessa Burns. She is over our Public Works Department. Ms. Burns, are you there?
Hi, Councilman James. I am. Can you hear me?
Ma'am, we can. It's all yours for the next 3 to 5 minutes.
Public Works has 467 employees about, and we basically provide a lot of services that are touched by all of our residents and our visitors, including snow removal, waste collection, traffic services, electrical maintenance, signs and markings. So there is a wide range of things that we do. In this past year, due to the proposal by the council and the administration, we've added several functions that we did not have before. They include Alley Action Crew, now the Clean Collaborative Crew, and we're looking forward to providing those services. I think they've made a big difference, and we'll be providing some during our budget presentation, and I think one before. We'll try to explain to people what we're doing. Thanks to the administration and the council that funded the Alley Action, the council paid for the $400,000 for sidewalk assessment. In the past, we also have this year done a new PCI or paving index so that we can work on the creation of a new paving program. And also the thing that the most important is, as a result of us spending about $80 million over the last 4 years, we'll have a better idea of how the roads are holding up with the additional funding that is going towards our road maintenance. One of the things that was very interesting was in the winter from hell in 2015, where it snowed a lot. We had 75,000 potholes. This year, we're estimating about 40,000 because of that investment of the $80 million. So I think that when there is an investment in those issues, especially assets, I think it makes a difference to all of our residents. So I just want to thank you for that.
Okay. Well, thank you. And next, we'll call on Connie Mendel from the Health Department.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to join you all this evening. So I guess from a budgetary standpoint, Health Department, we would probably say pre-COVID and during COVID. So those are two different budgets, as you can imagine. Like most departments, the majority of our budget is on staffing. We generally have about an annual budget of $8.5 million of local funds. So those are general fund dollars. And then we get additional funding with state and federal grants. So we have an operational side, and that would include clinic operations. So we have a tuberculosis clinic, and that is regional for the area. Our methadone clinic. We have our sexually transmitted infection. That's what we call our specialty clinic. We offer other clinical services in addition to Healthy Start and WIC services. We do have a laboratory, very fortunate to have our own laboratory. They do our blood lead testing for our childhood lead prevention program, for our wastewater testing, and support the region with those types of activities. And also mosquito control program, that's we do a lot of testing for West Nile and other viruses, and that's housed in our environmental program. So the environmental division is typically what people think of as the health inspector, a lot of food inspections. We've got 5,000 facilities that we permit and inspect in the city. And then, and those can be swimming pools, majority of those are food preparation. That can be our hotels, mobile home parks, and those type of activities. So then if we shifting over to the other side would be our Center for Health Equity. And with that, we do a lot of work with research and reports, community outreach, anything that we can do to try to diminish the the equities within our community and how that impacts our populations. So we may do a lot of policy research, policy development, advocating for those equitable policies. Some of that work has been within our health assessments or participatory budgeting. We do a lot of work with our syringe exchange program and harm reduction, substance use disorder, trying to reduce those. And then also looking at some mental health aspects as we try to reduce suicide, overdose, gun violence. And so that's a lot. So now if you shift to where we are now, we are obviously in the midst of a pandemic. So we're trying to continue running all of those programs, at least at an operational level, and also, with our response to COVID. So with that, we had just recently, council, thank you, approved a 3-month budget of $11 million. And that is for us to continue on with those disease investigation services, contact tracing. Obviously, the biggest lately is vaccine management and allocation. So just last week, our mass vaccination clinic provided its 50,000th dose in 9 weeks, in addition to, smaller events throughout the community and increasing mobile reach. Just today, we partnered with Norton with the new Janssen vaccine to provide vaccines at Wayside and Salvation Army. So those continue, and so some of that money went to some software programming for that and other outbreak services in the community. So we've supported some of the NTI hubs, Evolve 502, and other areas, the bail support, anywhere we can, in helping make our communities safer. So those are kind of two different budget processes and activities. I will say that, the CARES funding and additional fundings basically allowed us to double our staff. A lot of that's through contractors, because when we started out before COVID hit, we were at fewer numbers staffing than when we had to combat the Hep A. And we thought that was a huge endeavor. Little did we know that was just practice and a warm up to this COVID response. That's it for now, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And then next we'll have Tamika Laird with the Office of Resiliency.
Thank you, President James, and thank you all for having me today, be able to speak and present on the Office of Resilience and Community Services. Can everybody hear me? I'm getting feedback, so I just want to make sure. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about the Office of Resilience and Community Services. First, I want to start off with who we are. We are a multifaceted agency. First, we are a municipality. Second, we are a community action agency, one of 23 in Kentucky. We were established in 1964. We are also a partner of Continuum of Care with the homeless, and we are the co-lead of the homeless initiatives here in Jefferson County. Second, I want to talk about what our mission is. Our mission is to actually be able to sustain, stabilize, and provide and lead households and individuals to self-sufficiency. Third, I want to talk about our target population. The target population that we serve is homelessness, low to moderate income individuals and households. The fourth piece I want to talk about is the pillars that we focus on within our agency. We focus on homelessness, prevention, outreach, and advocacy. So that tells you who we are, what we do, what our mission is, and who we serve. I now want to talk about our budget. First, I want to talk about what our flat budget pre-COVID was. It was around $22 million a year, fiscal year. But due to COVID, the influx and the inward flow of funding that we received from COVID CARES, we are actually now up to $91 million in funding. And a lot of that is actually dedicated and allocated to the eviction prevention programs and the utility assistance program that everyone is aware of. We have done a lot of actually marketing to ensure that our community knows about these programs. Our agency is looked at as a wraparound service. We believe in building the individual or household up to be able to stabilize and actually lead them to self-sufficiency. We're looking at how do we better be able to build wealth within that household and also emergency savings. So we have our financial empowerment division that focuses on these areas. We also have housing and support that actually houses over 500 households that were originally homeless and provide permanent supportive housing to these individuals, and case management. We have 7 neighborhood places that you all are very familiar with, and they provide a one-stop shop for people to receive assistance and also wraparound services through DCBS, JCPS, and our other agencies within the neighborhood place. We also have our planning and compliance division that focuses on grants. We receive CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grant Funding, ESG, which is Emergency Solutions Grant Funding, and HOPWA, which is Housing Opportunities Persons with AIDS Funding. These are all grants that we receive from federal, HUD, Housing of Urban Development. And we're able to actually partner with a lot of agencies, homeless providers, in providing assistance and leveraging funds within our community to be able to reach the most vulnerable. So that tells you a little bit about our overall budget, what is our mechanics of how we operate. And then also I just wanted to add in just one more key area that I really wanted to highlight today was our utility assistance program. A lot of you, the great thing about it is that the Louisville Water Company has done a great job of marketing and advertising on the assistance that's out there. LG&E, we are pushing to ensure that our community knows that they can receive assistance up to $500 of assistance through the Louisville Water Company assistance through the ministries and then the neighborhood place. I want everyone out there to take hold of that funding and assistance and be able to go out and apply for it. It is available. We know that it's hard to maneuver within the realms of assistance right now because there's so much of it. If you have any questions or you need any assistance, you can reach out to the Office of Resilience and Community Services. Our number is area code 502-574-5050. Thank you.
All right, and thank you. And check to see if Chief Shields is here. Not yet. Okay. Well, with that being said, I want to thank all of our panelists so far and turn this over to Councilwoman McCraney and Councilman Arthur.
Thank you, President James. The two of us will do a feed in that we will gather all the questions that have probably gone to the chat room or on Facebook Live and any media. I'm looking now to see, and I don't see anyone in the chat. So I'm going to throw it over to Councilman Arthur to see if he has anything from social media.
And before I get to social media, I'll highlight a question that was sent via email from Charlotte in District 1, and she asked about vacant properties and abandoned properties. Is there a plan, or what is the plan for abandoned property in West Louisville? It is disturbing that there are so many. It attributes to blight and hopelessness in our community. Thank you. So I'll open that question up for any of our panelists to chime in on.
It's Daniel. Oh, sorry. I'll chime in. I'm sorry, Councilwoman Green.
Chair Hollander may also be good to speak to that question as well.
I'll start, and then if you want to fill in. Unfortunately, we don't have Develop Louisville here represented here, but they are the primary lead agency that works with vacant and abandoned homes. And they've been working from a report that was developed probably it's about 8 years ago, known as the RKG report, which advocates kind of a block, building from the block outwards in terms of trying to gain control of properties if they are not being maintained well. It's multifaceted in terms of how we try to manage it, in terms of compliance, our first goal would be to have property compliance, property maintenance compliance, if it's not abandoned, if it's occupied. And that can be more complicated than it would seem because they're not all owner-occupied properties. And then there's a compliance effort for that to bring the properties up to code and or have enforcement and fines, which is actually an area within O&D for collections. Secondly, if it's fully abandoned, they try to use the land bank to recirculate the property back to a willing owner who would take care of it. Many times those transfers can be done at a de minimis, cost for the property of $1 or something, just to get it back on the tax rolls and get it out of maintenance from Metro's obligations to maintain the property. So that's been the general strategy. It's been a much harder area to make improvement than we had hoped, at least a decade into this now. I don't know if Chairman Hollander wants to weigh in as well, but that's kind of the overview.
One comment, we did add money to those programs last year in addition to what had been proposed by the mayor, part of the budget that was finally enacted by the council. I think it was more than $1 million extra. There were several different programs that were funded additionally. The other piece I mentioned is affordable housing. So last year, the proposal was $5 million for affordable housing to the trust fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We increased that amount to $10 million and dedicated $5 million of that to a sort of build a block program designed for single family homes, primarily in West Louisville, in areas where there are abandoned homes. So that may be rehabbing some homes, it may be building some new affordable housing, but that's also, I think, part of the strategy. And that was an idea to not fund apartments with that money, but to fund instead single family homes in some of these areas with large numbers of vacant and abandoned properties.
We have another question from a District 4 resident asking about Algonquin Park Pool. Will it be repaired? Is there a plan for kids to be able to have some positive activities for the summer? So I'm sure we can all chime in there, but she's asking about activities for the summer for our youth and specifically talking about the Algonquin Park Pool.
Woman Dorsey still here. She may be able to respond about Algonquin Pool.
Jessica, it was in the paper yesterday that they will be only opening 2 pools this year. And that was in Sun Valley and I guess in Fairdale, but it's only 2 that was in the paper yesterday that they would only be opening 2 pools. Okay.
And I'll go ahead and jump to our next question.
They mentioned about about the activities for kids. I have not heard the plan at this point about what it looks like for community centers to be back open this summer. I'm hopeful that places like Southwood Community Center will be able to be back open because, I mean, it's home to so many of kids in my neighborhood.
And we talked about this next question a little bit in our budget meeting recently.
So we can handle that.
Shantae is asking, how much does the explanation of outcomes impact whether you will fund a program or not? I know in the budget committee, we talked about the model versus the administration versus the funding. So how much does the explanation of the outcomes impact how much you will give for funding or if you'll fund it or not?
Chair Hollander, can you speak to the process on that, please?
Sure. It's a great question, and you're right, Councilor Arthur. We did talk about it recently. I think, and I only speak for myself, but so I'm saying what I think other people typically talk about. I do think people want to see that their money is well spent and that we're being good stewards of the taxpayer money. So I think that people do try to see what outcomes are we getting for this? I know, for example, in the money that we put into homeless efforts, there have been, we've reserved a piece of that money for reports done by U of L really as to how this money is working. And those are all published and available to people. It's an interesting question though, because, you know, some programs that you're starting new, you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be. And sometimes you may not get the outcome that you want. And I think you also have to give some programs some time to work. So there's a mix of funding only things that you know are absolutely are going to work that you've done before, and branching out and doing other kinds of things and giving them a little time to see if they're going to work. But there is, you know, I mentioned that we have 30 budget hearings. A lot of the time in those hearings is what has the outcome been from the money that we invested last year and the year before. We spend an awful lot of time with that. I think taxpayers expect us to do that, to see that we're getting good results from their money.
Can I say something? This is Director Burns. When I first got here about 8 years ago, the annual budget for paving was $2 million. $2 million got you about 20 miles of paving. As a result of the winter from hell in 2015, and everybody all of a sudden noticed that our roads were terrible, we were so grateful to get that additional, it went ahead tenfold. And I believe that this console last year increased the amount of money that was initially provided for paving, because I think that people see what the value of investment will do. And I believe that is why there's a real effort if you put enough resources in. That's a good example, I think, of the connection between how much is invested and what you can get for it.
One follow-up on that point, we track, and it's actually in the comprehensive annual financial report for the city, how many potholes are filled every year. In 2015, the year that Director Burns is referring to, we filled 177,000 potholes in the city, which is about 4 times the number of potholes that were filled last year. It's just sort of an interesting stat. We'll see what happens this year.
I'll pull another question from the Facebook comments, and then maybe Councilwoman McCraney wants to address someone that's in the WebEx. This comment is about homelessness. It's directed at Director Tamika. Where can we find how the budget was allotted for spending and what specific results of how many houseless you have placed, and why are those hundreds approved for housing still waiting?
That's a good question, but I want to make sure, can you repeat the question so I can have some clarity on it, please?
So the question is asking about where people can see where spending has happened in terms of houselessness. Where has the spending happened? What were the results? How many people have been placed into permanent housing, long-term housing? And how come people are still waiting?
Okay, so to answer the first question, as far as where can they see it within the budget? This is actually embedded within the budget, but a lot of it, what they can see is if they can go to the comprehensive budget. I'm not for sure what page it's on, but it's actually for external agencies. They will see the list of agencies that are receiving grant funding. I want everyone to remember that we are 70% grant funded. So a lot of our actual report out and data tracking points are in the CAPER, which is the Comprehensive Annual Performance Evaluation Report. And this is actually published on the LouisvilleKY.gov website. And there is a link, and I can be able to forward it to the council members. And every year, this is for public viewing, and anyone can go out there and retrieve this document. It has the actual how many homeless individuals, as far as have been served with Housing of Urban Development funding. And that is Community Development Block funding, ESG Emergency Solutions, and then also Housing Opportunities with AIDS. Now, in order for them to actually get an actual report that is going to tell them as far as how many homeless individuals have been housed, they will actually have to check with the Coalition for the Homeless, which is the continuum of care. They provide a report that's on their website that actually tracks the overall as far as the reportable target points for homelessness, as far as how many days it takes for a person to be housed, how many have actually had a positive exit, and then so on. So this information is readily available, and they can access it through the Coalition for the Homeless, and then also through the LouisvilleKY.gov website, and go to the CAPER, which is the Comprehensive Annual Performance Evaluation Report. And then what was the other questions? I want to make sure that I answered all of them, Councilman Arthur.
Could you address why people are waiting when people have vouchers for housing? Why are they still waiting to get housed?
So there is a bottleneck. With everything that we do, I just want to make sure that we're clear about what that bottleneck is. One of the things that I continue to present on and actually request is that we need affordable housing. We need a lot of inventory within our community, especially one bedrooms. A lot of our homeless individuals are singles and they need one bedroom units. And those are not readily available in Jefferson County, especially for a person who has a voucher that is considered to be fair market rate. Then on top of that, the second thing we need is supportive services. A lot of our homeless are considered to be high risk, high need, meaning that a lot of them have mental health or substance abuse conditions that are very severe. And so they need supportive services in order for them to stay housed or be housed, or even to be stabilized. The third thing that I actually requested and needed in this community is vouchers. We can never have enough vouchers for our homeless. Right now, we have about 8,700 homeless individuals that are not housed and that are unhoused that will need vouchers. So even if we had enough inventory, we still don't have enough vouchers in this community.
I'll toss it to Councilwoman McCraney. We had a question in our WebEx chat that someone wanted to bring up about renewable energy.
Yes, thank you. That is the question about 100% renewable energy and a pilot project at the main library. I don't know, however, if the gentleman can actually speak online or live. So I'm asking him to put his question in the chat box so that I can read it out and get an answer.
Can you hear me?
Okay, this is Mr. McMullen?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead with your question, sir.
Okay. So in January, the council passed a resolution declaring that the city of Louisville will indeed address climate change. And we'll do that by being 100% powered by renewable energy, renewable electricity by 2030. And although there's been a lot of attention, understandably, to social equity, Black Lives Matter, revitalizing downtown, all of those kind of things. And tonight we've talked a lot about potholes. But climate change continues. We've had a recent flood event on the river, and these things are only going to get worse. So we, with Renewable Energy Alliance for Louisville, would really like to see you make some baby steps towards addressing this. One of the things that we can do is a pilot project of a solar installation on the roof of the main library. And what's holding that up? We think we can raise the money from donations for the solar installation, but the library's roof needs to be repaired. And so, Metro Council, I'm asking, will you please make sure that in this year's budget, which is your first chance to put your money where your mouth is, will you make sure that the library's roof gets repaired so we can put a solar installation there? And
thank you, Mr. McMullen. Let us get you an answer. Councilman Hollander, would you like to address it first?
Well, just briefly, and of course, this is way too early to be talking about any particular projects. We're getting input, and I appreciate Mr. McMullen's input. I do think this is an opportunity for us to move forward with renewable energy projects. and more sustainable projects. That he's mentioned one, I'm not really that familiar with it. I think there's a big opportunity for LED lights in the community, which are much more energy efficient, last longer in the long run, will be less expensive for the community. Now, we're debating right now in Frankfurt what the city will have to pay for LED lights, and that's part of the LG&E rate case, and the city is actively involved in that case right now. But it does seem to me, at least I'm one man's opinion here, I think these are the kind of things that we ought to think about investing in long term. And I know there have been some committee meetings about LED lights, for example. They provide more safety for the community. They're, as I said, they're less expensive in the long run, and they're much, much, much more energy efficient. So that's just another idea. And I do hope we have some discussion about those kinds of projects as part of the budget.
Thank you, Councilman Hollander. Would anyone from the mayor's office like to speak to that? Okay. Councilman Arthur, do you have any other questions?
Yes, we have Reginald who's asking about homelessness again. So maybe Tamika can jump in on this and anyone else could respond to it. He's asking about restoring old factories. He mentioned 12th and 13th Streets, about restoring old factories and repurposing them for housing. I wanted to get some insight on what that could look like, and also using psychologists, interns, sociologists, interns to run the facility, make it a rehab facility. So really transforming vacant and abandoned property to turn it into something that serves people who need it.
That is a great idea and proposal. And that is one that I've been actually in communication with the Office of Housing. Marilyn Harris is over the Office of Housing. She's the director, and she handles all capital infrastructure, especially building units, housing units in our community, along with the Affordable Housing Trust. But that is one thing that we have to start thinking about, is innovative ways of how we can actually produce housing for our homeless. That ideal is one that I have actually passed by every day on 13th, which is looking at those old factories and see how we can repurpose them for homeless and make them homeless units. I am going to throw out there a little bit about what I have actually seen and discovered in Chicago when I was there for our convention. We actually took a tour of the Arlington Place in Chicago, where they had actually converted an old Sears holding building into affordable units for the homeless, and then actually housed case management, all those supportive services in-house at that unit. I mean, within that facility, our building, apartment building. I thought it was a great innovation, pioneering approach to how we can actually solve homelessness. I do agree. We need to actually start thinking about how can we push forward and create these types of housing units that are going to be able to serve these subpopulations that are hard to actually house. And I hope, working with council and then also with the mayor's office and also Office of Housing, that we can come up with some great solutions to our overall problem.
This is another district.
Arthur, excuse me. There was a question about the lights. 17,000 lights are owned by LG&E. We only own the ones that are downtown, about 2,000. At some point, we hope that LG&E does decide to transfer the lights over to LG&E, and we, for the city, the 2,000 lights that are downtown, we hope at some point to be in a position to be able to do that as well.
We have another Facebook question from a District 4 resident. We should have taken bets on who could pull people in. This resident is in Russell, so maybe Councilman David James, Councilwoman Donna Purvis could speak to this, since we split the neighborhood. And they're asking about the home incentive program. When will the Russell home ownership incentive program re-engage grants for existing residents for qualified improvements? I understand there will not be another round of review until July.
Councilman Arthur? Can you hear me? Councilwoman Purviser. I would prefer if someone else would answer that because I don't want to give misinformation. So I would prefer that someone else answer that. Maybe Councilman President James can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm not sure on the exact timing on that right now. I would, if you could, Councilman Arthur, get that person's contact info, and I'll get the specific information. I don't want to put out information that's not actually accurate. So I can't tell you the exact information on that.
All right, we'll make sure to get you an answer for that. That was Michael. And Michael also followed up with another question about houselessness. What's the most recent analysis of our homeless in Louisville? Do we have data on how much of Louisville's homeless is due to residential displacement?
I can answer that question half. So let me just give you, right now, we're not actually have data that's tracking housing instability or those who are at risk of housing instability. We don't have a method of tracking that. We are utilizing our information and we are utilizing our services that we provide assistance as a demographic or a chart or a analytical tracking piece to be able to determine how many people we have provided assistance to. But actually identifying who are at risk of housing instability, that is not one that we have the actual source or data to track in Jefferson County.
Councilman, I just chime in here one thing, and this doesn't directly answer the question, but I do know that in 2008, and this is data from the Coalition for the Homeless, 70% of the homeless in the information system that they have were from Metro Louisville. 13% were from elsewhere in Kentucky, 5% were from Indiana, and 12% were from everywhere else. So in 2008, which is the last data that I have, and I think the last data that's been published, most of our homeless population was from right here in Louisville.
And I think I'll toss it back to Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey if she wants to speak on the Algonquin pool.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Arthur. I just wanted to say that this year we are looking to really understand what the next steps for the pool are, not just in filling the pool up with water, but also ongoing programming, and not just the pool itself, but the infrastructure, the pool house, etc. So there will be community involvement in that. There have been needs assessments done, and we are looking to really understand what's the feasibility of the pool in its current state and how we move forward with that. There were some issues last year, if anybody knows, with the park, with the pools and the registration. We had a lot of people who signed up who did not attend. So this year we really need to evaluate their process.
And I'll keep watching Facebook, but as of now, it doesn't look like we have any new questions. I'll toss it to Councilwoman Jessica Green, and maybe we could open it up to kind of talk through our districts and speak on priorities that we feel we might have based on what we already know.
Well, Councilman Arthur, I actually have a fan who wrote me directly on my cell phone. And the question is, where is the mayor and FOP in the process of their negotiations for a new police contract?
I'll take a stab at that. What I understand right now is that the FOP and the mayor's office are negotiating the contract currently. I do not know if a non-economic proposal or police reform proposals been made by the city to the FOP yet or not? I would say that Daniel could probably be able to answer that question.
Sure. So there's actually two different components of the FOP. There's officers and sergeants group and what's known as a captains and lieutenants group. That's basically lieutenants. We're in negotiations with both. The officers and sergeants have an active contract that was approved by the council back in, I believe, November of last year. That's currently valid through June 30th of 2021. We are in negotiations with them. The nature of the negotiations from the ground rules, there is not to be external communication on the nature of the actual negotiations, but these are just factual things that we have a contract in place through 6/30 of 21 with officers and sergeants. We do not have a final contract signed with the captains and lieutenants group. We do have an extension that's been signed through 3/31 of this year currently. So that's the current status.
Thank you for that, Mr. Frock. Councilwoman Green.
All right, I'm here, guys. Sorry, I'm walking, leaving track practice with the kids. But for me, one of the things that is the most important this year is, of course, the idea of reimagining what public safety looks like and exploring the idea of us doing some more intervention type of behavior as opposed to just, again, we support our police officers, but I think the definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over. And so it's not about the idea of defunding the police, but it's about looking at public safety in a new way. And so I'm very, very interested in exploring what that looks like. In addition, specifically for District 1, what is very, very important to me is the restoration of the Parkland Library. And so, what does that look like? How much resources is that going to take? What is a dollar amount? When we built out the new Dare to Care facility, it was my intention that the substation, the police department substation that was in the basement of that Parkland Library would be rerouted over to where our Dare to Care facility currently is. I've been clear early on this part of the budget season to the administration what my intention is, and for us to make some significant movement forward, making that a reality. So that's the most probably significant project in District 1 in particular that I'm going to be prioritizing and focusing on this year.
Okay, so from here, I want to ask Councilman Hollander to state again what the process is, what the date is for the mayor to come and speak with the council, and then from there, step us through exactly what your plans are to get us to negotiating what the budget will look like and how we present it in the end back to the community.
The mayor presents his budget proposal on April 22nd, and we will start having hearings on the budget on May 3rd. I know that a lot of people will continue to have these kinds of meetings, particularly maybe even more so after there is a proposal out there. So we will spend the entire month of May doing budget hearings. They're all online. They'll all be on Facebook so that people can watch them. Where we will spend time asking department heads how they've used the money, what they would plan on using the money, what are other possibilities, all those kinds of questions, trying to be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. And we'll also be getting ideas from the public and from other people about new programs and new initiatives. We will have 2 public hearings. I don't know the dates yet, but there will be at least 2 public hearings in May where people can come, sign up, and speak. If we can't do those in person, they'll be done by WebEx, where everybody has a chance to speak for 3 minutes. It's one of the things that worked better than I thought it would last year, thanks to President James's staff, who did a great job, and our clerk, who did a great job putting all that together. So we will have that kind of public input as well as individual meetings in districts getting ideas. And then we will, by mid-June, and of course there will be lots of one-on-one conversations where people talk about what their priorities are, what they can be for, what they can't be for, what they would like to see, what they would like to see changed and added. And then we will, by the middle of June, try to put together something that will get enough votes to pass and hopefully get everybody's vote. And that's, I always say this, it's a little corny maybe, but nobody gets everything they want in a budget. This will be my 7th year, and I've certainly never gotten everything I wanted in a budget. And I'm looking around the screen, I don't think anybody can say that they got everything they wanted in the budget. But we try to get a budget that gets as many people as possible to get something that they can support in the budget and get some of their priorities funded. And then, so I don't know when the budget committee will have its final meeting. It'll be sometime in the second week or third week in June. And the budget will be passed on June 24th and of course go into effect on July 1st. I'll also just say, the funding, and I'm repeating a little bit from what I said at the beginning, we also have this pretty remarkable opportunity from the American Rescue Plan of one-time federal money, which is, assuming the plan is passed tomorrow, as I anticipate, by the House of Representatives, will present hundreds of millions of dollars to the community to help us build back and to reinvest in the community and to begin, some new initiatives. It's a real opportunity. There'll be a lot of discussion about that, whether that will be approved by the council as part of this plan or whether it will be, as part of the regular budget or whether it will be separate. We have to work all that out. There are, some limitations on how that can be spent, but it's a real opportunity and there'll be a lot of discussion in the community. And we'll want to hear from a lot of people in the community about what they think about spending that kind of money too. So that's going to be, something new and different this year. And as I said, I think just a remarkable opportunity for the community.
Thank you, Councilman Hollander. Before we wrap things up, I want to ask Councilman Arthur, do you have any other questions in the social media?
No, I didn't see any. And before we go, I will go to our Greater Louisville Project data sets just to kind of look at the reality of what some of our districts are facing going into this new year. But go ahead and do what you need to do. Okay, so I guess we'll go to that, but I want to give everyone an opportunity, if they'd like to talk about 2 or 3 of their projects that they wish to see in the budget. If you had your wish list and you could have your way, what are your priorities for your district?
Councilwoman McCraney, before we proceed, I sent an inquiry into the chat that I have a question from a constituent that I'd like to ask if that is allowed.
Absolutely. I don't see it in the WebEx chat, but if you have the question, go ahead with it, please.
This is from a constituent of District 5. And I'm going to read it exactly how it is written. His first question is parking against traffic, and it states, we should start holding people accountable for breaking the law. Parking on the wrong side of the street not only is a non-moving violation, but this also does a few things. It's unsafe for oncoming traffic, and you're literally pulling out in front of drivers. Citing these people creates a safe neighborhood and puts money in our budget. It also teaches those who park illegally to do what's right. Citations range from $15 for parking in a non-parking zone to $100 for parking in a far or handicapped zone. From July 2018 to June 2019, the city collected an average of $155,000 per month in parking citations. That money goes straight to the city's general fund. So I'm thinking the first part of his question relates to lack of enforcement. If he feels that if we enforce vehicles that are parked illegally, that could add to our revenue, and it would create a bigger budget. Councilman Hollander, would you like to speak on that?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat I'm sorry, I did not understand the question. Happy to if you.
I'll just summarize it. He's wanting to know why there's a lack of enforcement as far as illegal parking that could generate revenue for the city.
Short answer is I don't know. There are two agencies that can enforce parking, I think, in the city. Park has the authority to issue tickets for illegal parking throughout the city, and of course LMPD. President James, you may want to comment on this. LMPD may well tell us that they don't have the manpower to do that kind of thing.
Actually, Councilman, I don't mind to weigh in. I serve as treasurer by function of the position, serve as treasurer on the park board. And okay. I would say, the goal, much like property maintenance, is to have turnover and compliance for the parking that's not obstructing traffic. The LMPD piece would be related to obstructing traffic and arterials, so that there's a safety element if somebody's parked during rush hours. That's generally the enforcement that they would undertake. But in terms of turnover for businesses, the goal is to have turnover. It is not to generate parking fines. I think the public should be aware in general fines are a way to have enforcement of the ordinances and statutes that are passed by the Council of the General Assembly. They're not meant to be revenue generators in any way for the government. So the preference would be to have businesses have turnover so that they have access. I would say that we've had from the parking authority prior to the pandemic, and just putting a pause for the last year, the pandemic has really slowed traffic in general. We have seen a large revenue fall off both in the off-street and garages and in on-street parking as people, as we all are, teleworking and so forth. We have not seen as much activity, but I would say we've had the parking authority criticize the other way, that they've been enforcing parking turnover too rapidly. There was a good instance of partnership with the council when the ordinance was changed a couple of years ago, that if you had if you had multiple outstanding parking tickets, there was a limited amount of enforcement. The council gave authority to boot cars, I believe, at the third unpaid parking fine. So that does assist in facilitating people to make their payments when they have violated the parking ordinances. So that's the short answer. The pandemic we have plenty of parking spaces downtown, and where we have metered areas, we've seen it fall off in the revenue. But I'd like everybody to keep in mind, fines are never meant to be a revenue generator. They're meant for enforcement, so that people come into compliance.
This is Vanessa Burns. I just want to say something really quickly, where we try to get people to comply when we're trying to do street sweeping. But I will tell you, there is a problem with a space at the impound lot. And so I know that that's been an ongoing issue. But that's something that people also need to know. There's no place for a lot of these cars.
Okay, and if I can continue to speak, he did send me a message. He's not concerned with the business district area. He's more or less concerned with the residential area. So, Daniel, thank you for explaining that these are not citations are not designed just to get revenues, but I think he's concerned with the lack of enforcement and the feeling that if enforcement was done as supposed to be, it would bring revenue for the city. And I think he is speaking about residents that are abusing illegal parking. So that is his whole goal in asking that question about enforcing illegal parking, and also just explaining that it could be a source of revenue if enforcement was done. And the last thing that he asked was about the police impoundment lot. He says the city is losing upwards of $1 million a year. We are scrapping good vehicles that someone may need or want. A breakdown is that the city must pay a few employees overtime to take said vehicles to scrap, getting little to no money, not even enough to cover the overtime as scrap metal is down, adding to the loss of possible funds. If the city would apply for titles to these vehicles, the cost when bidding on these vehicles at auction would be greater, and the city would receive more money, which would help with our budget issues and can be used for street paving, lighting, cameras, etc. Does anyone like to speak on that?
Unfortunately, that's really the impound lot is operated by the LMPD. My understanding is on the older vehicles, there isn't a title application that's required once it's past a certain age. I will say in terms of the disposition of the vehicles, they are either sold at auction or if they're unsold, they are scrapped. There's statutory guidelines for how to have disposition of the vehicles once they've reached the number of days for somebody to come claim them. And we follow the statutory guidelines.
And that's 90 days, Daniel?
I don't know the specific. I want to say that it's 45 days, but I don't want to give that information. That's my recollection that I would defer to the impound lot.
Okay, thank you.
So we have some more Facebook questions. District 4 resident is asking about downtown. What is being done to attract tourism back to downtown, Louisville restaurants, etc.? And how will future protesting affect those efforts? So I'll speak to this and then anyone else can jump in. There is a group called the Downtown Revitalization Team, and we are meeting weekly. We're talking, some of us every other day, to discuss what that looks like. This work group has different committees and community members. There's almost 70 people a part of this team. If you want to join it, please hit me up. But the committees include tourism, that encompasses the convention center, parks, hotels, and museums, marketing and communications, events such as art, music, and sports, commercial occupiers, mostly like mainstream folks, office tenants and commercial businesses, and then residential occupiers and residents, and then small businesses. So local businesses, small businesses. These work groups are meeting every week, and the committees will start meeting, I think, in 2 weeks to talk about that exact question. Anybody else want to jump in on downtown or maybe speak to the protest part? All right. I know in terms of protests, tomorrow morning, there will be a press conference from the mayor's office to talk about the plan for this upcoming weekend. We know that's the death anniversary of Breonna Taylor. So tune into that. They will share info about what protest looks like downtown for this weekend and hopefully beyond, just so that everyone is well aware of what you can and cannot do in our streets and everyone is safe. We have another question about 911. Will money be allocated for special response teams for 911 mental health calls? I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, we had a conversation about this in one of our council committees, and we did allocate some funding to divert some of those calls. Councilman Holler, do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Yes, that was a council initiative in last year's budget. It's being funded out of the LMPD forfeiture funds. It's a study by the University of Louisville as to how this can work in Louisville. We know it's worked in other communities, but we think it's important that it be done right here. There are a number of agencies who do this kind of work. You obviously have to work with 911 itself so that the calls get, triaged and go to the right agency. And U of L will be studying what's the sustainable model. How much do we have to put into this program every year to make it work? What can we expect it will do in terms of reducing workload from the police department? It's taken us a little longer than we had hoped to get it moving. I see President James nodding his head on that, but it's moving now, and I think we're committed as a council to do that. And I think LMPD also thinks that this is a good program to get some other people involved in some calls that can be handled maybe better than they currently are being handled.
Okay, any more questions in the chat or on social media?
We have more Facebook questions. Alicia is asking about the West End TIF. How will that affect Metro Council? We know that there's $30 million of seed funding, 10 from the state, and 20 would be from Metro government / private investors. How does this TIF impact Metro Council?
President James, could you answer that question, please?
Yes, ma'am. So the way that if it passes the state legislature, the way that it could affect Metro Council is that as we do budgeting every year, we are fighting. Each district is fighting for funds for its part of the city, and so if the TIF were to pass, it would allow for a group of citizens to determine how funds that are generated from the TIF are utilized and spent inside the TIF area, which is basically West Louisville from 9th Street to the river, down Algonquin Parkway, back up 7th Street to 9th Street again. That's a pretty general and broad way of saying that, but I hope that answers his question.
We have a comment that isn't really a question, but I'll throw it out if anyone wants to respond to the comment. It's about the West End having a lot of murders. How about putting a trauma center hospital on 18th Street? That's from Reginald.
I think that, I don't know if we have the space on 18th Street for a hospital, a trauma hospital, but I think it's duly noted, and I think all of us recognize and are actively working with each other and with members of the community to do what we can to try to reduce the numbers of homicides, because if you live in West Louisville like how I do, it's something that is an ever-present concern. It's a reality. Gunshots are ringing out, and so I hear you and I understand and I get it.
We have another comment from a District 4 constituent, Melissa. She said the safety and well-being of our city's residents, especially our Black community, should be prioritized before tourism. And obviously, I agree. That's something that's been brought up on this downtown revitalization team is how do you make sure that our Black community feels included in downtown? I strongly believe that if, the living conditions here for the folks that are in town are bad, then people who visit here, they're going to have a bad experience. So that's really important. Anybody else want to chime in on that before I go to the next comment or question?
I'll just say for the record that I believe that it's all important. And that's the tough job of any council and any administration when you're putting together a budget. We have to find that correct balance because it's really all important. Tourism brings in revenue, and we certainly want every community in our city to be represented with tax dollars. So that's the task before us. And so I'm looking forward to our conversations during this budget cycle.
Councilman Arthur, I'd just like to make a comment about that. It's something that has been on my mind when I hear of other residents make comments about what the West End is getting. And for so many years, we have been comfortable with not getting anything, while other communities have benefited from our tax dollars. And so I feel that now it is time that we get things to support our living. We should have the same amenities that they have. So if that comforts anyone in knowing that that is something that I support, something that I like to see, I agree with you. as far as the focus on this downtown revitalization. It is important, but it is also important for us to have a revitalization plan for the West End community and West End neighborhoods, not gentrification, revitalization. Thank you.
And I'll touch on I'll go ahead, Councilwoman Shakeland.
Yeah, I feel like Newburgh is a forgotten area. And, you know, when it comes to funding or anything, and Bill will tell you, I never get anything in my area. If I get anything for that park, I have to save the money up myself to get it. And I was very upset, and I still am, how much money Metro Parks sent back for capital projects. They put health centers and everything in Seneca Park and different places. They put nothing in this area, and it's a low-income area, just like it is in the West End. They could send capital money back for the mayor to spend it the way he wants, but they can't do anything. And, you know, anytime I asked, they'll say, well, we don't have any funding. They just told me they put this health center in Chickasaw Park. I've been begging for one forever. And when I talked to Denise about it, she said, I didn't even know they put one down there. Well, they have them in Seneca, they have them in other parks, and I have walkers that walk every day. They wanted stretched benches, those type things. We can't get anything. So I feel like my area is a forgotten area. And then they send the money back, capital money back. They don't do any maintenance out there. And they send it back and say, well, this is money we didn't use, when they could have been doing these things in the parks out here. So this is a low-income area, just like it is in the West End, but it's a forgotten area. And like I said, I'm still upset about it. Come budget time, you're going to be hearing me hollering and screaming again. So I put in a bill what I wanted in the budget, lights that have deteriorated in the park, that need to be replaced. Can't get Metro Parks to do anything. So you guys just be waiting, because you're going to hear me hollering. It doesn't do any good, but at least I'm heard. Thank you.
Councilwoman Shankland, can I say something? Chickasaw Park and Shawnee Park are Olmsted parks. So a lot of time the Olmsted organization will partner with the Parks Department for certain things like the exercise path and so forth that you will find in Chickasaw Park. So it's not necessarily parks doing that, but Olmsted, they do invest a lot in the parks in Chickasaw and Shawnee and 6 other parks that are in District 5. So I just wanted you to know that.
My argument is not what they do in the West End, because, I'm not comparing. I'm complaining because they send capital money back to the mayor to take their money to redistribute it the way he wants, when there are projects that could be done in my park, just like any other park, and they don't get done. Maintenance don't get done. And you heard me argue about that last year. And I'm looking to make sure it doesn't happen again this year. Because if they send $9 million back, $1.9 million back, they could have done something in my park. So yes, that money goes back to the mayor, then he redistributes it the way he wants to. So,
I understand.
Let me make one comment about that. And money that goes back that is swept at the end of the year, the mayor does not decide what to do with that money on his own. It still has to be budgeted. It still has to be approved by Metro Council. So, and let me say, Councilwoman Shankland, the way to get things in your budget that will get spent, that will stay there, are to be in the capital budget. And I have heard you loud and clear about those park issues. So that we need to get those kind of programs in the capital budget, and then they can get spent directly and not get swept back up. So
I'm gonna try.
I hear you. I hear you.
All right. I'm glad somebody hears me. Thank you.
More questions from Facebook. Will the racial equity reports be required for budget presentations this year? Maybe Councilwoman Dorsey could speak to this as the primary sponsor of the equity tool that we just created.
Thank you, Councilman Arthur. Yes, they will be. So The ordinance specified that this year, the vision statements, the mission, and the KPIs, which are key performance indicators, will be articulated per every metro department in this year's budget. Next year, that will be accompanied by a dollar amount to go beside that so that you can actually see where the spend is. So yes, to the simple question, or excuse me, the simple answer to that question is yes, it will be included this year. Thank you.
Does anyone know how much tax monies from the West End are currently given to the Metro Council budget?
I've never heard that question asked. Bill, do you know the answer to that? I've never heard that's really even something that actually happens.
No, I don't. I don't believe that, and Daniel could speak to this more. I don't believe that we track money from the Revenue Commission or from property taxes by any particular Metro Council district or neighborhoods. Daniel?
No, that's correct. The Revenue Commission, which I relayed earlier, is under the Office of Management and Budget, is set up to, like many things, enforce the ordinance on the occupational license fees. Those are actually employer-based on wages. So if you think about somebody who works at Ford Motor Company, the liability is with Ford Motor Company, and they remit on behalf of their payroll or whoever the employer might be. So they are not required to produce information about the zip codes of their individuals, nor do we require individual tax returns to be filed by individuals. So we have occupational license fees, but it would not be broken out by zip code. In terms of property taxes and the PBA and the like, similarly, they will administer by parcel, but they will send the bill to whoever the owner is. So, as I mentioned earlier, you have instances where people are not owner occupants of residences. So you might have a landlord that's in one zip code that owns real estate in another zip code. So they likewise are charged with assessing, and the sheriff is charged with collecting. So these are not set up, these systems are set up to administer the ordinance. They're not set up to differentiate the census tract or the zip code that the funds ultimately
A couple more questions from Facebook, and I'll just remind our panelists to make sure you're on mute. I hear some rumbling and fumbling in the background. Julia is asking about services for our houseless and low-income communities. With the recent snowstorms and flooding, are there any future emergency shelter and transportation arrangements, as well as permanent ones, for our houseless community in the works? We shouldn't rely on the nonprofits alone to get our citizens off the streets during ice storms, floods, etc. Let's allocate our tax dollars to help the low-income and houseless communities. So what's being done to help with emergency shelter when we have inclement weather?
I'll take that question, Councilman Arthur. During the inclement weather, which was about a couple weeks ago, we actually went into disaster mode, crisis management mode. We actually reached out to Wayside to actually identify additional beds within their hotel if we had actually met capacity within the shelters. Throughout the inclement weather, we had not reached maximum capacity as far as dealing with the beds in the shelters or white flag. So we never was able to utilize that over the actual additional beds that were allocated for this purpose. We also had created transportation for unhoused individuals that were unsheltered. We were able to use Wayside to actually create transportation to go and pick up these individuals who actually needed shelter. So the resources were there. We were making sure every day that we report on those resources and let the community know what efforts the city was doing in order to take care of our unhoused. So basically, that will be our overall disaster plan moving forward, and we will start building that out to be able to have other resources to wrap around it.
We have another question about pools in the West End. Councilwoman Dorsey spoke to this earlier. There is a pool. Algonquin Park has a pool. She's looking at not only filling up the pool itself, but also filling up the calendar and making sure there's programming around that pool. We have another question about the West End TIF, and it's referring to our budget. And just to confirm, we are unsure of how much this TIF will impact our budget or how much money we would put into the TIF. Is that the case?
I mean, I can only speak for myself. I'm unaware of it because I have not had any extensive conversations about the TIF. So I'm not currently up to date, unfortunately, on a lot of the specific conversations that have occurred.
Yeah, for me, the only knowledge I have that it may affect our budget is that there would be a request or proposal that the city put in a minimum of $5 million into the TIF.
President James is correct. If this passes the General Assembly, that would be the seed money. But just a reminder to everybody, the I in the TIF is the incremental piece. So the concept is not that it would affect the budget, it's that tax revenue from the area would be in excess of normal growth or what the base is, and the increment would fund itself. That's the general theory over the decades. But I think to jumpstart the TIF, the idea would be to have philanthropic state and local funding if it passes the General Assembly.
Councilwoman Green, would you be okay now maybe walking through some of our districts and looking at this housing data from last year?
Thank you.
All right, I'll kind of run through this quickly, and anyone and everyone can have access to this. But before I open up the map, I'm going to just talk through some terms that clearly explain what we're discussing. Thumbs up if you can see the screen. Everybody see the screen? So some of what we'll be looking at is about rental assistance. And you can see how that's defined here. Housing instability, risk index, that has different factors. COVID-19 impact index, and then the equity prioritization index, This is the Greater Louisville Project that released housing data from 2020. So just last year, 2020, they put out this information. And I'm going to pull up the council map. And this really compares what that data looks like across the board. I'll just go through some of these, and we know our districts better than anyone, but just for some of our constituents to kind of see what it looks like, the disparities that exist across this district. So rental insecurity, lighter shades indicate higher rental insecurity, and this is done by Metro Council district. Housing instability, which speaks to what someone was asking about earlier as it relates to displacement. COVID-19 impact subindex, which refers to, job displacement, home displacement, insecurity with quality of life. The equity subindex, which really refers to inequity that exists within the districts. Our poverty rates. Percentage of renters. Now this next one's kind of interesting, cost burden households. So these are for households making under $35,000 a year, and they are paying more than half of their income on rent. So our colleague, Councilman Anthony Piagentini in District 19, has a large concentration of people who are cost burdened. and their living. I'll go through a few more of these. And again, this is the Greater Louisville Project Housing Justice Report from 2020. It's a high level of overcrowding in District 2, it looks like. And Councilwoman Barbara Schenken, would you like to speak to that a little bit, like really break down what overcrowding is within households? You're on mute. You're still on mute. There you go.
All right. As far as overcrowding, you know, it's a lot of families within families living in houses out here. You know, grandmother, granddaughter and her kids and that type thing in rental housing. And I'm constantly getting someone call and say, do you know where I can get a house? Well, we have a lot of rental property, Section 8. And as I said, when families don't have a place to go, they move in with grandma, they move in with mama and all of that. So that's where our overcrowding is. It's just not enough housing out here. But yet and still, we don't have no place for apartments or whatever. There is apartments, but most of the apartments out here is for over, senior citizens over 55. And you can't bring, children in there. So that's why overcrowding. Families, it may be as many as 3 different sets of families in one household. And these houses out here are not big.
Thank you for sharing. We'll keep going through a few of these. I'll jump around. We're looking at unemployment rates. And you can clearly see where the inequities, where the disparities are within our city. No health insurance. Job loss due to COVID. So the lighter, the more jobs lost. We'll just knock out the rest of these real quick. Percentage of people of color. This outlines non-white people, and we know it in Louisville. It's almost about a quarter Black. So we see high percentage up in the West End, extremely low income. The lighter, the lower. Public assistance. And then foreign born. So I've been using that map for like the past few months to really dig into the reality of what our districts look like, of what the city looks like. And if you scroll up, that housing report also compares the city of Louisville to other cities. And when I mentioned cost burden households, Louisville is 2 out of 17 peer cities in terms of like having the worst cost burdenness. I think Tulsa's number 1, Councilwoman McCraney. So Louisville's not doing too well in terms of making sure that people aren't burdened with their housing. Any thoughts, any comments, any remarks, any like budget items that you think would help impact some of those issues?
Yeah,
I just kind of threw that out.
So looking at those numbers, Councilman Arthur, it's striking because a lot of the issues of devastation and a lot of the issues that need most of the resources, they're the districts that we represent. So things like overcrowding, houselessness, obviously moving out into the South End, lack of health insurance. So for me, the idea that the budget should be focused around the needs of the people is something that hits home. And so the people who need things the most are what we should be putting into the areas that need it the most. And so, a lot of the extras of budget are nice, and some of the fluff that we can do, but meeting basic needs, what are basic human rights, housing, food, health. Those are the issues that when we talk about what the priorities should be, in my mind, the basic needs are what we should be focusing on for the people who need it the most.
I agree, Councilmember Green. Being the Office of Resilience and Community Services, our job and our focus is on those who are most vulnerable. the populations, the low income burden populations that are disproportionately affected, which is like the West End, for example. Those are our clients that we see in day in, day out, that have crisis, who barely can actually live paycheck to paycheck, who are couch surfing, who are actually living in a multi-generational household. Those are the ones that we look at every day. The income, when you look at housing instability or income burden, us being 44.1% is something that is astronomical in nature when you look at the data. It strikes us hard within our community. And having to be trauma-informed care here as far as dealing with these households, because a lot of them are going through trauma. And because of the COVID, the economic hardships, and also dealing with individuals who have passed away because of COVID has added an additional burden onto these households. So when you look at it overall, a lot of these households are in trauma. They are dealing with catastrophic events that has occurred, and they're trying to actually just breathe and make it through. So we hear day in and day out from our actual clients and participants that we serve. And then also we're dealing with a lot of individuals that have mental health and substance abuse conditions that are very severe. I mean, very severe. So when you think about community-based services, that is where you need to direct those funds. We need to be able to provide community-based services that are going to make an impact in our community and change the overall health of our citizens. And when Councilman Arthur talked about District 4 and others that have saturated homelessness within them or income burden households within it, those are all things that we, the Office of Resilience and Community Service, has continued to try to actually target and then provide services, and hopefully to build those individual households up and have them learn about financial literacy, about how to actually build emergency savings, how to actually be able to have a living wage, meaning going back to school, getting certifications. Those are things that we're trying to educate our community on in order for them to think better or be able to do better. But the problem is that we as a society have to figure out, how do we message that in a bottle? How do we continue as council members to uplift our community? I'm sorry.
Can I make a comment? Can I make a comment about that? As you were saying that, you work with First Neighborhood Place and all that. Last year, I put $10,000 over there just for LG&E, water bills, whatever their need may be. I checked on it this year. The money never got used. Never was spent. People call me, Ms. Shanklin, my lights are getting cut off. I said, well, I have funding over there at the First Neighborhood Place. All you have to do is go get it. They've told me there's no money there. I checked on it. The money was still in O&B. So asked them nicely to put the money back in District 2. If it's not going to be used for the community, for the people that need it, then I want it back in my budget. And so the money was put back in there this week. Just want to let you know, there's a lot of times you send people to First Neighborhood Place, you say you have funding for rent, you have funding, and they get turned away all the time. They call me all the time. So that was the purpose of putting money there.
Well, Councilmember Green, when you have those type of incidents, you need to call me and let me know right away. And then I can be, I'm sorry, Councilman Shanklin, I apologize. I'm sorry. Councilman Shanklin, I apologize. Councilman Shanklin, when you have those types of incidents that occur, please contact me so that way I can be able to make sure that that money is spent on those who need it the most. I will make sure that's taken care of. That's my job. That's what I'm here for. And I want to make sure that we utilize that funding in the purpose and in the way it is intended to be used.
Well, they just put it back into my account this week. So thank you.
But for future, please talk to me and let me know if there's anything that happens that way, because I think there was some miscommunication between OMB and RCS. So for the future, please let me know, and then we can be able to make sure that that happens and that your constituents are taken care of. And then I'm also looking at all constituents across the board. So any council member that has any issue with any neighborhood place, please contact me so that way we can be able to actually mitigate the situation and be able to continue to provide the best services, customer service as possible. And that's the ultimate goal for the neighborhood place.
Thank you.
Councilman Arthur, I did want to jump in because going back to your data, there's something really interesting that the data has shown, and I love that Greater Louisville Project site, because oftentimes when we talk about poverty, we say West End, but the visual of the West End is not just West End as we think of West Louisville. Councilwoman Green and myself can tell you, if you go back and look at those maps, a lot of those trends tend to have a downward, still in the west though, but a downward or southward trend that still follows much of the West End, or in many cases, or in some cases, could be worse. So oftentimes when we think about poverty, if you look at that, if you go down that line, it travels through District 1 and 3. And oftentimes, if you see how far south that is, we oftentimes neglect, when we talk about West End, we think about the corner, but we really do have to think about that entire western corridor where we have a lot of issues that we need to address. So it's not just often in that cluster right at the top and around downtown and immediately around our parks, but we really do have to go further south. And I can't speak for Councilwoman Green, but I would say, I know her well enough to, if you jump in the car, or either one of us will be happy to show you that oftentimes we say West, but we still have the same primarily African American population, primarily the same income. You may be dealing with more home ownership when you talk about Shively, but you're still facing many of the same issues when we go to the Southwest. So that's just something to keep in mind. Oftentimes when we say West End, we think about the 9 West Louisville neighborhoods, but we also have a larger corridor that we have to be considerate of that still has the same desperate impact.
I have a question, and maybe it relates to some of our viewers, as me being new up here, going into my first budget cycle. Could you all speak to the experience of talking about these inequities, talking about these disparities? What is the experience on council from your perspective when you can clearly see a line of demarcation of poverty in the county? How do you translate that to the budget, and then how does the budget outcome help mitigate these issues, or does it, and why not? Because you can clearly see where the issues are. Does the budget reflect addressing those issues? Why or why not?
I think the budget represents a compromise. And what everybody has to remember is that it takes 14 votes to get anything done on Metro Council. And so there may be things that Jessica Green individually would pull money from here and pull money from here and place it there and place it here. But the idea of you've got to build a budget that 26 people are going to be able to live with, and are going to be able to support. At least 14 people are going to be able to live with and be able to support. And in my experience here, I mean, the budget typically passes either unanimously or 24 to 2 or 25 to 1 is typically not a super controversial document, because you have tried to build, give and take, to be able to try to come up with something that everybody can live with. And so that's how the process works. One individual, unfortunately, just can't say this is what I want. And so trying to build bridges, there may be things that, okay, Sonny, there may be things that have to come out or that have to go in that one individual may not like, but it's to try to get a document passed.
Councilman Arthur, I'm going to speak to that. Sometimes we are granted with what we request in the budget, but what we are granted with, there is no follow-up. And I'm not going to really identify some of the problems that I've noted, but if there is money put in the budget for a certain project or for things to take place, sometimes it doesn't happen by the department that is supposed to support that venture. And there are delays, and I understand that there are delays, but sometimes there's a lack of follow-up as to why isn't this happening? There's money in the budget to do it. And so that can be frustrating, and it also makes us look ineffective. So I just wanted to share my piece on that. Thank you.
That map, you'll see that District 2 sits out by itself, pretty much the same as the West End. And it sits out there by itself. That's why I always say that it's a forgotten area. So.
Okay, so here's a good time for us to do just a lightning round of our districts, starting with 1, ending with number 7, so that we can wrap this up. We're coming to the end of our time on this budget forum. So if Councilwoman Green would like to start first to talk about some of her budget initiatives that she will be fighting for this budget cycle, and we'll go from there in progression. Thank you.
You. As I think I spoke a little bit earlier that for me, it's this idea of what we can look like, how we can reimagine possibly the concept of public safety. So I'm very, very interested in the budget initiatives surrounding de-escalation and putting resources into other departments that can help with some of the issues that are not policing issues, but that are more public safety issues. As I previously stated, I am prioritizing the Parkland Library and am hoping to get some movement there. We have spent a lot of time, energy, and resources in that Parkland corridor. Parkland is on the rise, and so I want to keep some of my focus on Parkland right now and some of the things that we have, some of the momentum that we have going, which folks have been quietly working on for years, is something that is going to vastly increase the quality of life in that area, and that's going to help with foot traffic. It's going to obviously increase living standards for youth and for senior citizens. And so that is the largest project that I'm going to be focusing on this year, and certainly am looking forward to hearing from constituents. So please call me directly, 574-1101. That's the purpose of us doing this. I don't want to just say this is the focus, because the purpose of this is for us to be able to hear from you all. So please call me.
Councilwoman Shanklin.
This year, well, as every year, I focus on the youth. My Newburgh Middle School is right in the midst of the park. And so that a lot of activities from school activities are in that park. So I'm constantly trying to improve the park to make sure the kids have the things they want. The Boys and Girls Club is right in the park. And the community center is right across the street from the park. And so is the library. So the kids in that area utilize that park. They're there every day. They got all kind of softball. The whole focus is right there in that one area. So the biggest focus we have right out there in Newburgh is the youth. And, they're the future. If we can get them under control, go to have t-ball games, have tennis classes, and they've already started doing some of their things. but all the youth center in that one area. So it's very important to me to have the things that they need and want. The library's right there. Everything is in one block. And that's where all the youth in the Newburgh community go every day. So that's why I'm constantly hollering about making sure the tennis courts are right. They want pickleball, we got that going. The GE gave us money for a soccer ball field. So, and the schools are part of it. They have activities in that park every day. So that's the whole thing.
Dorsey?
Thank you, Councilwoman McCraney. I would say as far as citywide goes, what I've been working on and a passion of mine is home ownership. And so recently in working with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, there is a proposal to address at a very minimum level, I would even say it's a pilot, to address home ownership in previously redlined areas, specifically with a focus on vacant and abandoned homes. It has been long a concern of mine that we've seen the work of the redlining project, but there was almost absolutely nothing done to actually move anything forward. Once we had the data, the question oftentimes was, well, what's next? What are the next steps? So there is a proposal that has been submitted to the mayor in that regard. And I would love to see more work done around home ownership, revitalization. And I think Councilwoman Purvis said something I liked. She said revitalization, not gentrification of low income areas, especially areas where we have a lot of vacant and abandoned homes. We have a housing issue, but we also have a lot of vacant and abandoned homes. To me, 1 and 1 equals 2. Therein lies a solution to a problem if we're able to focus our resources in revitalizing a lot of our homes and vacant properties. Of course, Algonquin Pool has always been a passion of mine. It was a passion of the former councilwoman. And I certainly see why. I am a product of Algonquin Pool and a product of that community. And so seeing that pool become more than just what I say, a hole in the ground with water, to really becoming a community asset is something that I definitely want to see move forward this budget year. And then, of course, at the local level, and I say local meaning District 3, is just really focusing again on infrastructure and public safety. So making sure that we can increase the light increase our lighting count. As Councilman Hollander stated, even moving to the LED lights, which are brighter, that produce more safety, going to basic things like making sure that the trees are trimmed back, that folks have the ability, to walk down sidewalks that aren't cracked and broken, or streets that don't look like third world country pathways that are in the middle of neighborhoods. So really anchoring down, the built environment that supports a community and that ultimately lends itself to economic development because of its curb appeal. So that is really where I will hang my hat this year, is around housing, the pool, and the infrastructure of the community, especially in our west and south end. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Growing up in District 1 in the Parkland neighborhood, I'm really proud to hear Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey talk about the changes to that pool. I used to walk up the street and go there as a kid all the time, and I'm glad to see it being improved. As you saw from some of our Greater Louisville Project data, District 4 is number 1 for poverty, number 1 for extreme low income, number 2 in unemployment, number 1 in rental insecurity, housing instability, percentage of renters. Housing is a crisis within our district. So top 3 priorities now, and I can't wait to hear from more constituents, but our top 3 priorities now are: number 1, no income housing; 2, extremely low income housing; and 3, living wage job programs, whether those are the actual jobs, training, certification, or otherwise.
My focus here in District 5 are vacant homes. District 5 has the highest number of vacant homes throughout the city. And I'm currently working on a project with some constituents in the Portland area, addressing the vacant home issues that have become quite problematic in that area. So vacant homes are high on my list, as well as illegal boarding houses that are wreaking havoc on my constituents. Have to keep a key focus on anything that can bring harm and danger to my constituents. So I have a heavy focus on illegal transitional houses. And my goal is to continue to fund programs that help those that are at or below the poverty guidelines, for those that are in need of home services, such as furnaces and hot water heaters and ramps. I do give a certain amount annually to programs that help constituents that are in need of those basic services. Also, I'm very into my parks. Shawnee Park, as you all know, that I was able to get the logs removed that had been there forever. Shawnee Park, Chickasaw Park, along with the help of Parks and the Olmsted Conservancy. Those parks are also getting some upgrades. And last but least, I am focusing on infrastructure in the district, and that includes sidewalks, speed humps, paving, and let's not mention that it is still very important to me to work with Public Works to get these streets and these alleys cleaned up, and not only get them cleaned up, but get the tools that we need to prevent the illegal dumping from happening. You know, I think it's terrible that, you know, we have to speak with elderly constituents that don't have the means or the resources to clean up behind their properties when people are illegally dumping. Nor do I think it's fair that they are cited for something that they didn't call. So I'm going to speak out loud. Public Works, I still need you to help me out. You know, if we can, you know, get these cameras ordered and get this chart going so we can start putting these cameras up to catch these violators, because it makes no sense to clean up all these alleys and people continue to illegally dump in them. So those are my key focuses for this year, and until I see some results, they will continue to be my focus. Thank you.
President James.
Thank you, Councilwoman McCraney. I would say that my budget focusing for this year is going to be focused on sidewalk repairs in my area, also speed humps and lighting issues. And then I think that, as Councilman Green was talking about the Parkland Library, it's really important that be turned back into a library. I also think it's important that we put some money in the budget to do a lighting study to see, especially when you think about crime, to see where it is that we actually need lighting at, and make sure that we get the lighting put in those areas. I think the deflection issue that we've been talking about with LMPD and ensuring that we have mental health services and social services for people that need it in our community is very important. I think that dealing with the houseless and those without a place to live, the city should maybe consider buying a old hotel in order to have a place for people to actually be at. I think that we have run homeless services by kind of like remote control, and have never really embraced it as a problem that's ours. We try to make it other people's. And I think that we should make it ours because it is ours. I think that also looking at how is it that we deal with the violence in our community? We have people that are victims of violence. We have 173 people that were killed, over 700 people were shot, and we have citizens that are living in fear daily that have been victimized because of all this violence. But yet we don't really have a response for the victims, meaning that I think there should be funding set aside to offer ability to take a witness and move them away from the situation in which they live in, because the police have a trust issue, number one, but they also have an issue of if someone speaks about the violence that takes place, then they too become a victim of that violence. So moving witnesses to another place, to another location, if that means that we provide the first month rent and the deposit so they can go someplace other than that geographic area that they're trapped in, we should do that. And so we should look at doing those types of things. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are victims to the violent crime, and we're not doing anything to address that in a real way, and that's very troubling to me. And so those are just some of my big things, I think, along with the sidewalks, are our roadways, and our green energy. We have the opportunity. I think Councilman Hollander was talking about earlier. I don't know what the cost is to get that roof fixed on the library, but I think we need to start moving in a direction that says that we're listening, that we are paying attention, that we recognize that sustainable energy is the direction that we need to go, and we need to figure out how we get there. And I'll quit talking so much. Thank you.
Thank you, President James. You did a great job. In fact, one of my initiatives, while not in my district, I am so glad to hear what you said about the homeless population, because on my list of importance is us being very creative and having the hard conversations on how we're going to tackle homelessness. It is imperative that we do something. While we might have the potential to have a lot of extra money to come in and build back better, we've got to put money in our houseless and homeless population so that we can tackle the problem and not just throw money at it. So thank you for that. That certainly is something that I've already indicated to the budget chair that I'm interested in. And I want to do an updated traffic study for Westport Road and Brownsboro Road. And of course, I have so many different suburban cities with their own small governments. So I will be working with each of them to make sure that we can look at putting LED lighting into as many communities as possible. Lastly, I want to look at street paving. And so those are the things that I will be advocating for. And so we have Councilwoman Green, if you want to take it from here, I throw it to you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And Councilwoman Shanklin is going to do our closings and thank yous.
Excuse me,
Councilwoman Purvis, I apologize. Councilwoman Purvis, I apologize.
Okay.
Look alike.
On behalf of the council, I'd like to thank everyone who took the time out to listen to hear how your tax dollars are being spent. And I know that numbers and finances can cause a panic to hear and understand. And I want to thank our departments, our department heads that took the time out to share the simple details of their operations and helping everyone to understand their purposes and the need for their services. If anyone has any additional questions, I would encourage you to contact your council person for further clarification. And again, thank you for being with us and have a good night.